So let's have a talk about classes. What are they in programming and what should you know about them? They are a great way to stay organized. It's a way of creating a special class of information and routines, code that is set apart in its own class and can therefore control what comes in and out of it. What you get depends on your language as far as classes, but most languages, even JavaScript, has some support for classes these days. Most modern languages have that. JavaScript, you're not even going to put a method on a class in JavaScript. But with some of the other languages, you'll have, it just depends on what you're dealing with. If you want to know how to really implement what I'm talking about, I have the other series of videos that, if it's not already out, it soon will be. A number of languages that I'm going to talk about how to write in that language, how to code in that language. So, yeah, let's dive in and see what type of options are common. This is just kind of in general, what's sometimes available. It just depends on what it is. Now, JavaScript is only going to have that field. And a field is a public variable. That's really what it is. It's a variable that you can change, which means whenever you're accessing that within your class, you need to check for changes yourself. You need to check for the validity of that information yourself upon each use. Properties, on the other hand, are kind of a hybrid between methods and fields. And Visual Basic is the only one I can think of that actually supports property as an actual declared type of member to a class. Most of the other ones, they will use methods. They'll have a get method and a set method. But with a property, it is actually designed to be declared, read only, read write, write only, and it's the ability to run code on the action. So you can notify when that information's been retrieved. You can assemble that information as it goes out. You can notify when it comes in. You can disassemble it and put it wherever it needs to go. You're running code as this information is being brought in and out of that class with a property. Now, a method is a way of running code. It's basically a public function, basically. And it's the way of having code that's on that class. Now, that's where we're going to get into modifiers as well. I mean, everything that's in that class, all these properties and methods, they will have access, and the constructor and the destructor will have access to everything in that class, but not everything else does, which allows for a lot more control over that information that you have in that class, over how that class works, so you can make sure that it stays running the way it's supposed to. Constructors and destructors, different languages sometimes provide for, one or the other. Usually if it allows a destructor, it will usually allow a constructor, but not all of them even allow constructors. So your language, take a look at what your language has on that. But the constructor is something that is used to set that class up, and the destructor is used to clean up everything and shut it down. They're basically kind of like methods, only they're usually not really methods. They're only called on construction and destruction. But sometimes, like in Python, you could call them because they're not protected. If you don't have good encapsulation, sometimes that's the case. So for encapsulation, we got 3 different major modifiers over here, and you should look up the documentation on your language. There may be more than just these 3 types of modifiers. But public means it's accessible outside the class to everything that calls it. Anyone can call that. something that is protected is going to be available in, it's going to depend on the language exactly as far as how they do that, but most commonly what I've been seeing is that child classes, those that inherit that class, can access it. If it's a child of that class, it can access it. There's also additional modifiers that may mean additional things as well. And then a private means it's not accessible outside that class. Depends on your language. Some will allow inherited classes to access private. Some will not. It just depends on your language. Look up the documentation on that. But that's the general concept here, is you have those modifiers that you can use to prevent things from being able to be accessed outside of what you expect. It makes debugging easier then, because now you know your bugs have to be in certain spots. Nothing else really could have accessed that. You know, it's in that certain spot. You know it is. Keep looking. You can focus your attention where you know the problem is, not everywhere else where you're not sure if it is. Inheritance, it means one class can inherit another class. If your language supports class inheritance, it means that it can create a child class of a parent class. So you can take an existing class and you can extend that or inherit that, and then you have a child class that has all of its parents' members. All of the parents' members are now a part of that child class, as well as whatever else it wanted to extend. So, you know, the parent might have, you know, 3 different fields. The child's going to have those 3 different fields and whatever else is declared in that child. So, if it declares 2 additional fields, it may even override some of the parent's fields. And that's where there's some other modifiers too, as far as overridable and stuff like that. Some, like I know Visual Basic 7, VisualBasic.net, that's got a lot of modifiers. You got to dig. It's got a lot of stuff you can do on that. I don't plan on doing any reviewing of the Visual Basic series because I'm a Linux runner, and I don't think I still have any computers I can run Visual Basic on and do the screencasting for. I don't think that's going to be possible. So we won't really be able to show that, but take a look at your documentation. Interfaces allow you to implement. They set a standard of what a class needs to look like. For it to implement that interface, it needs to meet certain criteria. That's only available in certain languages to be able to have an interface. I know Java was big on it, and I think C was also big on it, that you could do interfaces. So that means that you have a certain template. You've got to have these certain members available for it to qualify under that interface, but it doesn't actually inherit anything. It just has to implement certain members. So it's useful, like say, if you're trying to say, I want to be able to receive a class for my function and I expect to call these certain members, I'm going to write an interface that says, you've got to have these members, this argument will receive something that implements this interface. That way I know those members exist. So it's a way of describing a class, and then you can match that class description. Thank you for watching.